Cults and their charismatic leaders can get inside your head. So many good people can be suckered in, and their experiences are usually awful. Please join me in welcoming Slumlocker. The first 5 stories will be on my channel, and the final 5 will be over on his. So when you're done, please be sure to head over to his channel to get all 10. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I wasn't raised in church. My parents grew up with very religious parents and didn't want to force anything on us. That being said, in high school I got very curious about God and religion, and I started dating a guy when I was in 9th grade, who took me to the church with him. He was a Southern Baptist, so I kept going. We broke up, but that's important because that was my first experience with church. I just wanted to do the right thing. That isn't what this story's about. It's just a little background. Fast forward to my senior year. I start dating a guy in my grade. He was always popular and pretty mysterious. Everyone knew that he was religious, but didn't know what kind. They knew because his mum would attend our choir concerts always wearing long skirts and no jewellery nor makeup, and always had her hair in a bun. His best friend didn't even know what church he went to, but he told me that they didn't have a TV and weren't allowed to watch movies. I was very nervous to ask him which church he went to, even though we were dating, and I figured that after 3 months, I should know. I had asked him a few times to go with me to the Baptist church, but he always declined. Finally, I got up the courage and I asked him which church he went to, and he only replied with, "You should see for yourself." I was quite excited. I got to be a part of it and be part of his life even more with his invitation to his church. I went out and bought a long skirt and threw my hair up, and figured that I should be respectful and dress like his mother. He picked me up that following Wednesday evening and drove me to the meeting. It was at a Holiday Inn conference room. Everyone was very old except me, my boyfriend, his younger brothers, and 2 toddlers. The meeting, as they called it, was run by 2 very elderly women from Ireland. I could barely understand them, but the Bibles they used were ordinary Bibles, so I didn't feel too uncomfortable. They had a hymnal that just said hymns on the front. Everyone sang a cappella. There were never instruments. It was a very strange evening, but because they used a typical Bible, I figured it was fine. I eventually stopped attending the Baptist church that I was a part of, and strictly went to my boyfriend's meetings. Wednesdays were held at Holiday Inns, and Sundays were held in various friends' houses. Each member was called a friend. The meetings weren't huge, maybe 10 or 20 people. Each fall and spring, though, they held conventions. They would be on someone's farm and would be every friend in the state, and sometimes a few surrounding states. Those weren't very big. We would stay in quarters and listen to people speak from the Bible. You also had a chance to stand up and read a verse that meant something to you. All of this happened very slowly, and over the course of 2 years or so, I must have been obsessed with trying to do the right thing and follow Jesus, because I didn't notice that I was being brainwashed. He took my virginity, and I ended up living with them. I have no idea to this day how the transition even happened, or if my parents wondered where I was. My parents were in the middle of a messy divorce, and honestly probably didn't even notice that I was gone. My boyfriend's mum didn't believe in using hospitals or doctors, and took a holistic approach to her family's health, and my health. She had me on different vitamins every day of the week. I was already very skinny, but over time I lost even more weight. I probably got down to around 80 or 90 pounds, and she also made me take iodine drops underneath my tongue every day. This all led to me being severely underweight, and I had stopped sleeping almost completely. I think the doctor said it was all the vitamin B12 in my system. Whilst in a hazy state of mind, I ended up getting baptized in a lake at one of the conventions. Shortly thereafter, when we went home, I started having panic attacks. Everything from this time is such a blur to me. Such a blur. I eventually had one big panic attack that threw me over the edge. I had a complete mental breakdown. I remember a few things very vividly. I tried to read the Bible to calm down, and I couldn't read anymore. Everything was just shapes and blobs. This led to more crying. My dad remarried 2 weeks after the divorce and married a woman called Nikki. I was convinced they were both Satan because of this. So I tried jumping off a very large hill near the house that I was staying at. I would have at the very least broken many bones if not died. I thought I was already dead, and was convinced that their house was a coffin, and they were burying me outside, and my soul was overhearing it all. I guess they realized that there was something wrong, and probably didn't want to be liable, because they found my dad's number and told him to come get me. I fought going, cried and screamed, but my dad took me back to his house. I couldn't sleep that night again, and I thought his house was the Twin Towers and that I was stuck inside as they were falling down. I started seeing rainbows everywhere, and my brain was truly messed up. The next day, my dad and stepmom took me to the behavioral health hospital. I remember it was the day that Steve Irwin died, because my dad told me in the waiting room, and I thought for sure that he'd murdered Steve Irwin and that's how he knew he was dead. But it was on the news in the waiting room. Either way, I stayed in an acute wing of the hospital for 2 weeks. They took my vitals several times a day. I had to go to group therapy sessions and drink Ensure all day until I was finally up to a healthy weight. That man and his family messed me up. I hope to never see them again. It's almost 10 years later, and I have nightmares about them still. I had one actually last night. They're mostly just present in the dream. I've had the courage to finally try and Google the name of the cult. It took some digging, but they're called the 2x2s. I sincerely hope that my message can at least help someone. Please, cults are never good for you.
I was married to a Scientologist. Obviously, I'm using a throwaway. Well, Scientology is weird. It's all-consuming, as most cults are. My ex-husband only knew and associated with people in Scientology. However, all his friends were actually very, very nice and really cool to me. I made a lot of friends through him. I never felt outwardly pressured to join Scientology, but the insidiousness was absolutely there. I'll get to that. My ex-husband was raised in it. You can say he was a second-generation Scientologist. His parents joined up back in the L. Ron Hubbard days, and they were in it. They both worked for the church as auditors. They were dirt poor. All of their money went to the church, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were so deep in debt. They had no health insurance and no money for anything except rent for their tiny, run-down apartment. The part made me the saddest, they were nice people. Now, I married him back when I was younger, more idealistic and willing to overlook major differences. I was a bit lost myself and really just looking to connect with anyone. I was always atheist and actually really against organized religion, but he always assured me that Scientology was not something that he was active in and that it wouldn't be a problem. He wasn't taking any courses all the time we dated and we were engaged, so I believed him that Scientology was more like his parents' thing than his. After we got engaged, he started telling me how a friend of his needs some help. She started training to become an auditor, that e-meter thing you hear about, and needed someone to practice on. I declined. He kept asking and insisted that it was just for her practice. That doesn't mean I'm doing Scientology, and that it would mean a lot to him. So I did it. Okay, what a silly experience. Honestly, it's just really silly. You sit in the room with the auditor, hold these cans. Let me tell you, the rigmarole they use to get the cans set right so they pick up their wavelengths, or whatever they call it, is laughable. Lotion on the hands, squeeze the cans. That didn't work? Go for a walk, drink some water. Lotion again. Squeeze the stupid cans. All this over and over until something on the auditor's end says that it's working now. And then you're good to go. I lied through the whole thing. They acted like I made some amazing breakthroughs. I got a floating needle, and then that was it. However, I was then called over and over and over to come back in. What the hell? I thought this was a one-time thing to help this chick out. Nope, they were all over me. They wanted 3-hour sessions, days in a row, on weekdays. No wonder Scientologists are all poor as shit. They want you in constantly during working days. I became so disagreeable to them that they actually gave up calling me to get me in. I guess they figured me being married to one was enough to eventually get me. The Scientologists on the lower portion of the bridge tend to know nothing about the Zen stuff. I asked them and they acted like they'd never heard of it. I guess you don't get to read that tech till way later, a few 100,000 deep. The overriding insidiousness I saw was the learned ability to scam people. I witnessed a Scientologist's own business get taken down by the feds for frauding their clients. The reason I divorced him was because he stole a large sum of money from my account that was not to be touched. It just vanished and he had nothing to say for it. He opened 2 credit cards in my name and maxed them. He put me into financial ruin. It was a disaster. Sorry if this was rambling and all over the place. It's been a number of years since, and I haven't really talked about it in a while.
When I was 15, I moved to Utah. It was a smaller town just north of Salt Lake City, and far enough west that the wind would carry the smell of the lake, and the air would reek of spoiled sea. I got dumped halfway into sophomore year, which was terrible for an awkward kid in a new place, because in Utah, they began high school with sophomore year, so I was effectively a freshman twice. The only luck I had was a girl I met named Sarah, and we started dating right at the end of the school year, so we were able to spend the majority of summer together. Now, you might not know this about the Mormons, and I certainly hadn't, but in their church they really like big families, something about spirits in heaven requiring bodies. So it wasn't uncommon for some of the more devout Mormon families to have 8, 9 or more kids. It really just meant outdoor freezers packed with hamburger helpers and houses with bigger kitchens. Sarah's family was pretty Mormon, and my family didn't practice much of any religion. So we just never discussed it. She had 6 sisters, 7 including herself, ranging from 6 years old to 18. I only met her mother once, and she was always pregnant. And I never spoke with her dad. I was a little too overwhelmed by meeting her family, and I avoided it. I probably would have figured it out by then, but I'd only lived in Utah for 6 months, and everything already seemed so weird to me. I remember a particular night I'd picked her up. She had a curfew that made it so that I had to park down the street so that she could sneak out. I wanted to jump over a small gully flanked by trees beside her house, but she refused, and we had to walk around, which meant passing her parents' window. I thought it was weird, but I just assumed she was worried that she might get her feet wet. It went like that for a couple of months. I would stop down the street, and I would wait while she walked besides the gully around her house, and up the street to meet me. Sometimes I'd meet her at the end of the road, but I was always careful not to walk too far onto the lawn, for fear I'd wake her parents. One night it was raining, and I didn't want her to walk alone through the dark in the rain, so I had planned on surprising her by meeting her by the back door through which she snuck out. To save time and avoid walking by the window, I walked over to the trees and saw the gully. The water was a bit higher and moving quicker than normal because of the rain runoff, but I figured that I could make the jump. Man, was I wrong. My feet landed in the mud on the other side, but I sank immediately in the wet earth and splashed hard into the muck. The rush of cold water was a shock, and I reached up and grabbed the storm drain. But what I had grabbed and dislodged flowed down with me. The water wasn't very deep, maybe 2 or 3 feet, so I stuck my shoes in it, still holding what turned out to be a black garbage bag. I dropped it and started to crawl up, and my hand landed on another black garbage bag. I tried to crawl up, but they kept dislodging this slick, viscous grime. It must have been the 3rd or 4th time I tried to find something to grip onto, when I accidentally tore one open. At first I thought it was a rotten orange, black and decaying amongst a spoiled nest of old bones. But I could just make it out. Yellowed skin bloated on white bone. It was a skull. A baby. I let out a shout. I didn't know what else to do. It smelled awful, and I was suddenly afraid to be near it. Quickly I scrambled up through the mud and kicked myself up against a tree, my heart racing. Sarah was there. She was crying. She had been waiting for me by the street and came over when she heard me shout. She must have always known. I never saw her again, and all of the girls were pulled out of school. The local news report said that her father had decided he had enough kids and had been burying each newborn out by the gully. But they recovered 5 tiny bodies, all girls. I wonder if he had just been waiting for a son.
Exchange students sometimes have it worse. I was an exchange student from Malaysia and was placed in Missouri in 2006. They were a family of 4, son and daughter, and they lived somewhere around Webster Grove. They looked nice, warm and welcoming, but it was all a facade, for they were trying to gain my trust. Coming from a country where all your neighbors are practicing a million different religions will kind of desensitize you, or make you very aware. I was the latter. The first week was fine, but sometimes I would wake up a little early and find them gathered in the kitchen in a circle around the kitchen table, mumbling and whispering. They'd stop as soon as I entered. I was very disconcerted, but brushed it off thinking it was an American quirk. During the 2nd and 3rd week, it became worse. The boy wouldn't touch me because I'm born from sin, his words, and the girl was afraid of me because I spoke to his father whilst looking him in the eye. I started prodding her for answers whenever little things that I did, which are normal by the way, like reading before bed, talking directly to the parents, eating a sandwich, would elicit small gasps of hyperventilation. She told me that I have residues of wicked and that I was going to hell. She told me about a cleanse and a daily prayer wash. I've seen them singing the same hymns over and over again, reciting the same verses in different tones, and it really freaked me out. I wasn't stupid. I realized I was in a cult when they took me to the church. I was made to sit in the front row. The pastor was conducting the service specifically for me. I realized it when I looked around and saw that everyone was looking at me. I felt like I was in a horror movie. Wide-eyed, silent stares. Men and women were separated. People wore different colored ribbons on their wrists, and the children looked haunted or just plain frightened. Nobody spoke to me or even came close to me. The men never looked me in the eye, and the women whispered and shunned me. I went there twice. School was on break, so I had to stay with them. Many weird things happened, but none was as bad as waking up in the middle of the night to find the mother sitting next to my bed, reciting verses from the Bible in the dark. As soon as I'm awake, she stopped and silently walked away. The family began treating me badly after that. I was punished for being out of line. No dinner, locked until morning, no sweet drinks. I had to cover up with long-sleeved tops, long pants, skirts, etc. I think it lasted because I was curious. They probably thought that since I'm from Southeast Asia, I must be quite gullible and naive. They tried brainwashing me about how sinful I was, how lost I was, how the world is going to end and I'll be dragged into hell unless I accept their teachings. I was there for a month before our chapter coordinator came by for a visit. I told her everything, outside of the house, naturally, and I left with her immediately. We came back with a group of people from the exchange organizations about an hour later and found them in the midst of burning the things of the sinful non-believer. Thankfully, my passport and other relevant docs were untouched. I never found out what kind of cult they were.
My mother was dating this guy who owned a houseboat with this man a few years ago. One of the guy's nephews, called Scott from Nova Scotia, decides to move up and work with his uncle and rent the houseboat that he and my mum owned. Anyway, he moves up in December, so when Christmas rolls around and we're all hanging out at my family's Christmas party, we're still just getting to know Scott. Somehow the conversation rolls around to cults, and he immediately pipes up, "Oh man, don't even talk to me about cults," to which my brother jokingly replies, "What, were you raised by the children of God or something?" Scott's jaw drops to the floor, and he shouts, "How did you know?" It was a completely random guess, just the first cult name that came to my brother's mind. He didn't really tell us much about his experiences in the cult, but we later found out through unpleasant experiences that he was deeply psychologically troubled. He checked himself into the hospital after numerous suicide attempts, got kicked out of both jobs and the house because he never showed up and never paid rent. The whole story ends pretty damn tragically when he disappeared one day on his way to work for the power station. He was missing for months, and we'd all thought that he'd run away or killed himself. Finally, some hiker found his bones scattered in the woods around where he'd been living. The exact cause of death is still unknown. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Please be wary of cults and don't let them poison your mind. It always starts off small, and they try to reel you in more and more and expect more from you. Your time, your money, and your commitment. Remember, you can say no, you can step away, and it's never healthy to let someone or something have control over what you want to see, say, or do. Ever. Stay strong, guys. I'd like to give a huge thank you to the incredible Slumlocker for his help in this video. Now please be sure to follow the link on screen now to check out part 2. But remember to hit that like button and drop a comment with your thoughts before you go over to please the YouTube algorithm. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.